So I want you to picture a man standing in the freezing cold, I mean, absolute freezing cold of Auschwitz.
Right.
And the guards have stripped him of seemingly everything. His identity is just replaced by a number. His life's work as a scientist, his beloved family, his basic human dignity, it's all just gone.
They had taken essentially every conceivable physical freedom a human being could possibly possess.
Exactly. But in that unimaginable darkness, Viktor Frankl realized they had actually missed something. Like one tiny indestructible thing.
The ultimate freedom.
Yeah.
The ability to choose his inner stance, because no matter what they did to his physical body, he retained absolute control over how he was going to respond to his tormentors and to his fate.
And so, in the absolute darkest chapter of human history, he chose meaning. He chose to maintain his moral dignity, even looking death right in the face. And I bring this up because it leads us to this incredibly jarring paradox that we live in today.
Well, absolutely.
Look around at your own life right now. You have maximum external freedom. I mean, you can choose where to live, what career to pursue, who to love. And yet, if you are like most people, you probably feel internally trapped.
Yeah, completely paralyzed by the sheer volume of choices.
Right, because our topic today is this illusion we're all under. We're constantly chasing this abstract idea of happiness while simultaneously running terrified from the concept of duty or responsibility.
We really do. We seem to hold this deeply ingrained illusion that duty is a cage, and that chasing limitless pleasure and comfort is somehow the definition of freedom.
But in this deep dive, we're going to completely dismantle that illusion. We're going to use this method called triangulation.
Which is such a powerful approach.
It really is. We're basically weaving together cutting-edge psychology and neuroscience with ancient spiritual wisdom, from Islamic theology to Eastern philosophy, to prove that fulfilling the right duty is actually the highest, most profound form of happiness.
But before we get into the mechanics of how this all works, we want you to hold a mirror up to your own life for a second.
Yeah, think about this.
What massive, life-altering decision are you currently avoiding, simply out of convenience?
Is it a career pivot because your current job is just, hollowing out your soul?
Or maybe ending a toxic relationship?
Right. So to understand why we avoid those terrifying, life-altering choices, we actually have to start a lot smaller. We need to look at the biological mechanics of how our brains handle everyday decisions.
And this brings us to what psychologist Barry Schwartz popularized as the paradox of choice.
Right, the paradox of choice.
The core idea here is that we naturally believe more options give us more freedom, but biologically speaking, an abundance of options actually causes the human brain to just freeze.
Wait, I mean, that doesn't really make sense to me on the surface. If I'm buying a house or looking for a job, I want to see 50 options, not 5. Like, why would limiting my choices be a biological advantage?
It's all because of the immense energy cost of simulating the future.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, think about this really fascinating Caltech study that analyzed decision-making using lottery choices. They found that the biological sweet spot for the human brain is between 8 and 15 options.
8 and 15?
Exactly. When you have fewer than 8, there really isn't enough variety to make a meaningful comparison. But the very moment you cross that threshold of 15 options, the quality of your decision just plummets.
So what is physically happening in the brain at that point? Like, why does it break down?
Your working memory basically gets overwhelmed.
Yeah.
To make a decision, your prefrontal cortex has to project a simulated future for every single option.
Oh, wow.
You'd have to imagine, okay, what will my life look like if I choose path A? What about path B? What about path C? And doing that 15, 20, or 50 times consumes a massive amount of glucose.
So it's an energy drain.
A huge one.
Yeah.
Your brain literally runs out of metabolic energy, and the system crashes into what we call paralysis by analysis.
So it's like having 50 browser tabs open on an old computer. The fan is screaming, the battery is draining rapidly, but you aren't actually doing any work. Nothing's loading.
That is the perfect analogy. And, while staring at 50 types of jam in a supermarket is trivial, applying that same cognitive overload to endless career paths or infinite dating profiles raises the stakes exponentially.
Yeah, people end up analyzing endless hypothetical scenarios, terrified of making a suboptimal choice.
Exactly. They're searching for a perfect option that simply does not exist.
And the terrifying part is that not making a decision is by default, a decision. You're just surrendering the script of your life to blind chance or to the will of other people who will happily make those choices for you.
And the psychological toll of that surrender is devastating. I mean, look at the WHO data from 2024. Over 330 million people worldwide suffer from depression.
330 million, that's staggering.
It is. And cognitive overload and the chronic stress of unmade decisions act as massive exacerbating factors. Humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers identified a specific mechanism behind this suffering. He called it congruence.
Congruence, how does that work exactly?
So congruence is the alignment between your ideal self and your actual behavior. When you avoid a hard decision out of cowardice or just convenience, you create a gap.
Right.
There is the person you know, deep down, you morally should be. And then there are the cowardly choices you are actually making.
Oh, that's heavy.
It is. That gap breeds an agonizing, low-level anxiety that just haunts you.
Yeah.
But when you act in alignment with your deepest values, even if the action is incredibly difficult, you achieve congruence. You sleep with a quiet conscience.
Wow. But if the pain of incongruence is so high, and we logically know that avoiding these decisions is destroying our mental health, why do we stay paralyzed? Like, why do we keep taking the easy way out?
Because the easy way out is literally hardwired into our prehistoric biology. Every single day, a human being makes about 30,000 unconscious micro-decisions.
30,000?
Yeah, filtering sensory input, motor skills, digestion, all of that.
Yeah.
But you only have the energy to make between 50 and 200 fully conscious, deliberate choices.
Wait, only up to 200 conscious choices a day? That is a remarkably tiny budget for a modern human.
It's severely limited. Conscious thought is the most metabolically expensive activity your body performs. Because of that, your brain operates as a highly efficient survival machine.
Seeking the path of least resistance.
Exactly, and instinctively seeks that path to conserve energy. When you choose an easy, familiar route, the brain rewards you with a hit of dopamine. From an evolutionary standpoint, this kept hunter-gatherers alive. Find calorie-dense food, get dopamine, repeat.
Right, but we live in an environment of artificial superstimuli now. Infinite scrolling on social media, endless on-demand entertainment, hyper-palatable foods.
And those superstimuli are completely hijacking the system. There's a massive systematic review from 2025 showing that excessive engagement with these artificial dopamine loops directly degrades our executive function.
Really? Like it physically affects the brain?
Yes. The prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for long-term planning and moral reasoning, literally weakens. We lose cognitive flexibility and become highly impulsive.
So we are essentially scrolling away the neurological hardware required to make hard choices.
Exactly.
But let me challenge this a bit. People always talk about decision fatigue and how our willpower depletes as the day goes on. Is this just a matter of needing more grit? Are we just running out of willpower?
Well, the science on willpower has actually evolved dramatically in recent years. We used to look at the famous marshmallow test, where kids are told to resist eating a marshmallow to get a second one later.
Right, the classic delayed gratification study.
Yeah, and we used to assume it just measured pure, isolated grit. But researcher Tyler Watts added crucial context to those findings in 2018. They proved that willpower is heavily moderated by your environment and socioeconomic stability.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning that a child from a stable, predictable environment finds it much easier to delay gratification because they have been taught to trust their environment.
Oh, so they trust that the adults will actually come back with the second marshmallow.
Precisely. If you grew up in chaos or trauma, your brain is wired to take the immediate reward because the future is completely unreliable. So no, it is not just about gritting your teeth.
That makes a lot of sense. If the world feels unstable, delaying comfort feels like a biological risk.
Absolutely.
But regardless of where we start, we still have to find a way to break out of this dopamine-driven cage. Which brings us back to Viktor Frankl.
Yes, Frankl's concept of logotherapy provides the actual bridge out of that biological trap. He realized that while Freud believed humans were driven primarily by a will to pleasure, that model completely failed in the extreme suffering of the concentration camps.
Right, pleasure wasn't even an option.
Exactly. The people who survived, psychologically speaking, were those driven by a will to meaning. As Stephen Covey later synthesized from Frankl's work, between stimulus and response, there is a space.
In that space lies our power to choose our response.
Yes, your biology will demand the easy dopamine hit. That is the stimulus. But your humanity exists in the pause before you act.
That is so powerful.
And epidemiological data overwhelmingly supports this now. Long-term clinical studies from 2024 and 2025 show that people with a strongly defined sense of meaning in life have drastically lower rates of anxiety over a decade. Meaning isn't just poetry, it is a measurable neurological shield against despair.
So the word it's self-responsibility literally means the ability to respond.
I love that, yes.
Life asks you questions through daily challenges, and by stepping into that space and making the hard choice, you are answering life.
That's beautifully put.
But here is the major hurdle. Science tells us that meaning acts as a shield, but how do we actually calibrate our internal compass to find that meaning? I mean, we're fighting millions of years of evolution here.
Right, and for that we have to look outside the laboratory. We have to turn to centuries of religious and philosophical mapping.
Okay, where do we start?
Let's look at Islamic psychology, which offers an incredibly sharp functional framework for this internal battle. They have a concept called fitra.
Fitra, what does that mean in practice?
Fitra is the foundational belief that every human being is born with an innate, pure moral compass, a natural disposition toward truth and goodness. You don't have to be taught basic morality. Deep down, your soul inherently recognizes justice and rejects cruelty.
But if we inherently know what's right, why do we constantly make such a mess of our lives?
Because the fitra is constantly at war with the nafs.
The nafs.
Yes, the nafs is the lower ego, the desire-driven self. It is that biological voice we discussed earlier, constantly pulling you toward short-term gratification, pride, laziness, comfort.
So every decision you make is a battlefield.
Exactly. A battle between the divine light of your fitra and the gravitational pull of your nafs.
How do you defend against the ego then? Does the Islamic tradition have a mechanism for that?
It does. The shield against the nafs is called taqwa. It is often translated simply as God consciousness or spiritual vigilance.
Spiritual vigilance.
It's a state of awe-inspired awareness where you act with absolute integrity, not out of fear of human punishment, but out of a desire not to disappoint your creator.
Right.
If you possess taqwa, you will make the agonizingly difficult, morally correct choice, even if you are entirely alone in a dark room and no worldly law could ever catch you.
Wow. It's an internal locus of control. Your North Star shines from within, completely independent of external applause or consequences. And what is fascinating is how this psychological battle mirrors the other great Abrahamic traditions.
Absolutely it does. If you look at Christian Ignatian discernment developed by Ignatius of Loyola, the process of making a decision involves a profound inner analysis of your impulses.
You don't just weigh pros and cons.
No, you ask, does this impulse lead me toward love, connection, and spiritual growth, which they call consolation? Or does it feed my pride, isolate me, and lead to desolation?
So you are testing the spiritual origin of your impulses. I know the Jewish tradition has a very intense practical application for this too, through the practice of Musar, which focuses on developing the midot, or character traits.
Musar is brilliant because it removes morality from the clouds and grounds it right in the dirt of daily life. It teaches that character isn't forged in rare, heroic moments. It's forged in the tiny, irritating micro-decisions of your day.
So, applying Musar. Let's say I'm stuck in awful, completely stalled, bumper-to-bumper traffic.
A classic scenario.
My NAFs, my biology, wants the dopamine hit of screaming, honking the horn, and just raging. But Musar would say, stop. This traffic jam is not an annoyance. This is a literal training ground provided by the universe in this exact moment for you to practice the specific trait of patience right now.
It reframes the struggle completely. You aren't a victim of traffic. You are a student in a classroom of patience.
But wait, fighting your ego, maintaining spiritual vigilance, practicing intense patience in traffic, that sounds utterly exhausting. Isn't there a massive risk of just burning out from all this intense moral striving?
That is the danger of looking only at the rigid, effort-based traditions. To find balance, we have to look to Eastern philosophy for a brilliant counterpoint.
Okay, lay it on me.
Taoism offers the concept of Wu Wei, which provides a profoundly healing balance to all this striving.
I've heard of Wu Wei, but it's usually translated as doing nothing, which always sounded a bit, I don't know, apathetic to me.
It's actually a terrible translation. Wu Wei means effortless action, or acting in perfect alignment with the natural flow of reality. The Taoist philosophers Zhuangzi explained this using a famous parable about a master butcher.
A butcher?
Yes. This butcher used the same knife for 19 years, cutting through thousands of oxen, and the blade never dulled.
How does a knife not dull after 19 years of cutting bone?
Because he never actually cuts the bone.
Oh.
The butcher explains that a good cook has to change his knife every year because he hacks wildly at the joints. But the master butcher is so in tune with the anatomy of the animal, so entirely present, that he intuitively guides his incredibly thin blade through the natural, empty spaces between the joints. He uses no force.
That is a stunning metaphor for decision-making.
It really is. When you force a decision through agonizing, cramped overanalysis, you dull your own mind, you hit the bone. But when your ego is quiet and your values are clear, the right action happens almost automatically. You flow with the natural order of things.
And the Buddhist tradition echoes this, right, with the middle way.
Exactly. Life is like the strings of a lute. If the strings are too loose, representing a life of pure hedonism and convenience, they produce no music. But if you wind them too tight through fanatical, rigid asceticism or duty, they snap under the pressure.
True living only happens in the perfectly balanced middle.
Precisely.
We've covered an incredible amount of ground here. The biological energy cost of choice, the ficha versus the ego, Ignatian discernment, and the effortless action of wu-wei. But how do we synthesize all of this?
That's the big question.
Because ultimately, we're still dealing with a tension between doing what is required of us, our hard duty, and finding our own personal happiness.
Historically, the greatest philosophical minds seemed completely at odds on this exact tension. Immanuel Kant argued that human beings must follow strict, unyielding moral duty, driven purely by reason, regardless of how it makes us feel.
Okay, the rigid path.
Right. On the other side, Aristotle argued that the ultimate goal of human life is eudaimonia true, flourishing happiness achieved through practicing virtues. For centuries, people assumed you had to choose between Kant's grim, exhausting duty or Aristotle's pursuit of happiness.
And what is the resolution? Who was right?
The big reveal is that at their highest levels, they're the exact same thing.
Okay, let's unpack this, because doing something that makes you physically exhausted and miserable does not sound like the definition of happiness to me.
It depends entirely on the source of the duty. True duty is not an external cage. It is not driven by a fear of punishment or a desire to conform to societal expectations. True duty grows from your conscience, and ultimately, it grows from pure love.
Give me an example.
Think about a mother at 3 in the morning. Her child is violently ill. Waking up in the freezing cold to clean up after that child violates every single biological drive for comfort she possesses. It is pure, agonizingly exhausting duty.
Right, there is zero dopamine in that moment. Absolutely zero.
None. But she doesn't do it because a legal statute forces her to. She does it out of profound, unconditional love. And because she chooses to take on that heavy responsibility out of love, that exhausting, sleep-deprived act is actually the purest expression of her ultimate freedom. It is the deepest form of human flourishing.
That completely flips the paradigm. When you act out of love, the duty transforms into freedom.
And we now have incredible neurobiological proof for this philosophical concept. A 2025 study in Nature Scientific Reports explored something called the distance effect in human decision-making.
The distance effect.
Yeah, they found that when a person's core values are crystal clear, the neurological process of making a difficult choice bypasses the agonizing analytical centers of the brain entirely.
How does that actually work in the brain, though?
Well, imagine 2 options. Option A is staying in a warm bed. Option B is caring for the child you love more than your own life. Because the value distance between those 2 options is so massive, the brain doesn't waste energy simulating futures or debating.
It just knows.
Right, it creates a neurological superhighway straight to the action. The decision becomes completely effortless. You don't actually suffer from the difficulty of the physical task itself. You suffer from a lack of clarity in your values.
The suffering comes from the lack of clarity. That is wildly profound. But we need to make this actionable. If someone is listening to this right now, facing a massive crossroads in their career or relationship tomorrow morning, how do they apply this?
We can break this down into a really holistic 6-step practical toolkit for masterful decisions.
Target, let's go through it.
Step 1 is the 24-hour rule. You have to create temporal distance to break the biological cortisol loop. Nature published findings just this year showing that even slightly elevated stress hormones measurably degrade your prefrontal cortex's ability to reason.
Which perfectly aligns with the advice of the Prophet Muhammad. When a man repeatedly asked him for the most important advice to live by, the Prophet gave the same answer every time. Do not get angry.
Exactly.
Never make a massive life choice when your nervous system is hijacked. Walk in nature, put your phone in a drawer, let the biology reset.
Step 2 is the Islamic principle of shura, or wise consultation. You have to shatter the echo chamber of your own mind.
This is so critical. If you are thinking about leaving your spouse and you only talk to three friends who also hate their marriages and want you to join them at the bar, you aren't getting advice. You're getting an echo chamber for your naffs.
Precisely. Sure, it means finding mentors who have the intellectual bravery to tell you hard, uncomfortable truths. You need people who will point out your blind spots.
Okay, so you've waited 24 hours, you've consulted wise mentors. What's step 3?
Step 3 is triangulation. You analyze the options from 3 distinct angles to ensure total alignment. First, your spirit or conscience. Can I justify this choice to my highest moral ideal? Second, long-term science and health. Where does this leave my physical and financial stability in 5 years? And third, ethical philosophy. What is my duty to my community and family in this scenario?
Let's say you've done all that. You've analyzed the angles, and the path is still terrifying. What's step 4?
Step 4 is istikhara and tawakkul. For religious individuals, istikhara involves actively seeking spiritual guidance after exhausting the rational work. Then comes tawakkul, which means absolute trust in the outcome. But it is vital to understand that tawakkul is not passive.
Right, there is that brilliant story about this. A man came to the prophet and said he was going to leave his camel untied outside because he trusted in God to keep it safe. And the prophet immediately corrected him, saying, tie your camel, then trust in Allah.
It is the ultimate formula for anxiety reduction. You do your absolute maximum practical effort, you research the job, you have the difficult conversation, you tie the knot as tight as you possibly can, and only then do you completely detach from the outcome.
That leads directly into step 5, which brings us back to Wu Wei and meditation. Once you have tied the camel and made the choice, you have to stop agonizing over the what-ifs.
And this is backed by a 2025 Frontiers in Human Neuroscience study. It shows that meditation physically strengthens the neural pathways between the brain's self-awareness centers and the decision-making centers.
So sitting in stillness actually changes the brain.
Yes. By sitting in stillness, you are literally building the physical space between stimulus and response that Viktor Frankl talked about. You flow with the choice instead of cramping up with anxiety.
And finally, step 6 is implementation intentions. This is based on psychologist Peter Gallwitzer's if-then planning, which was also just backed by new data in trends in cognitive sciences.
Right. You don't rely on willpower in the heat of the moment. You make a preloaded rule. If my boss yells at me tomorrow, then I will take 3 deep breaths before speaking.
I love this because you are automating your duty. You bypass the dopamine-hungry biological cage entirely because the decision was already made yesterday by your highest, most rational self.
Exactly. When you pull all of these threads together, a very clear picture emerges. We live in a labyrinth of artificial stimuli, surrounded by billion-dollar industries that are actively trying to sell us the easy way out. They want you distracted, impulsive, and comfortable.
But your daily decisions do not just shape your career trajectory or your bank account. They weave the actual immortal fabric of your soul. Dodging responsibility isn't an escape route. It is a sprint into emptiness.
Embracing the hard path, illuminated by a clear moral compass, is the only way to find true freedom.
We want to leave you with a profound quote attributed to the mystic Rumi that captures the essence of this entire journey. He said, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself."
True wisdom isn't just listening to a breakdown of neuroscience and philosophy. It is the daily, grinding refusal to trade your massive human potential for cheap, short-term comfort.
Think back to Viktor Frankl standing in the freezing darkness, finding that unshakable North Star within himself. The question for you today is simple. Will you continue to sell your massive potential for short-term comfort today, or will you stand still, tie your camel, and make the hard choice? If you want to dive even deeper into these concepts and read the full article that inspired this deep dive, head over to meaningoflife.coach.